Welcome to Extraordinary Women on thatchannel.com. I'm your host, Shannon Skinner. Well, I'm really excited about today's show because you're going to meet Nelofer Pazira, who's a well-known filmmaker, author, and a journalist. And later in the segment, before we take a break, I'm going to have my Good to Know Minute when I ask my guests for their top tip on creating a successful life. You're going to hear Nelofer's. Nelofer, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Now, you're an award-winning Afghan-Canadian director, actress, journalist, and author.
Am I?
Well, your bio says so.
Okay, well, I have to believe it then.
A multifaceted artist.
Wow, that's even bigger word. Yeah.
Now, you grew up in Kabul, Afghanistan, where you lived for 10 years under Soviet occupation. What brought your family to Canada?
Survival, in one word. But to go beyond that, I grew up in an environment which what we considered was police state. Everything was controlled. To live under occupation, obviously, only those, I think, sometimes I claim, only those who have lived it, they know what I'm talking about. It's fear minute by minute, uncertainty, and on the top of that, there is, of course, a war going on. My family eventually decided to leave. It wasn't easy to just pack and go. It took many discussions and arguments between my parents and then you couldn't leave. It's not that you could have just go and buy a ticket and use your passport and get on a plane. So we had to, months of planning went into how to exit the country because the government wouldn't allow people to have passports. You couldn't just go anywhere. The best destination was India to travel, but if you didn't have the government's permission, they could have pulled you out from the airports. You couldn't go. The only route that millions of Afghans left the country were through smuggling, and it was to go to Iran or Pakistan overland because these are the neighboring countries. So we decided to go to Pakistan. And you pay a smuggler a sum of money. Your life's in the hand of this one person, and they
so you're smuggled out of the country.
We were, and it took us about 12 days to walk over. We did most of it by foot, and we got to Pakistan and lived there for a year as refugees. And then eventually, I think my dad felt we needed to go somewhere where we could get education. We were young, and my father got accepted into Canada as a political refugee. And of course, we were, the dependent family with him, so we arrived in Canada. That's practically how it all happened, and very fast pace, and the decisions to leave the country, I think, were, as I said, for survival, to try to find a life outside that chaos.
Now, in 1996, you attempted to return. You went back to Afghanistan, still under Taliban rule, to find a lost childhood friend. Why?
Well, I'm going to have to track it to you that when we arrived in Canada, we settled in Moncton, New Brunswick, which is what I consider hometown, one of my hometowns in Canada. I had to learn English. I went to high school there, and I had a childhood friend which I'd grown up with in Kabul together. My family decided to leave. Her family decided not to leave. So we used to exchange letters. Every few months, sometimes 6 months go by, but eventually we would, communicate by writing letters and passing it on either to refugee families who traveled, or putting money of it. She used to put a letter in the mail for me every week. A lot of them didn't make it, so we would just do that on a rumble thing of hoping that one of money will reach each other's hand. And we used to exchange those letters, and between 1992 and 96, there was a civil war in Afghanistan that things got really worse. I have many of her letters that describe the life conditions in those days. When the Taliban came and took over Kabul in September of 1996, she started to write and somewhat became depressed because now she couldn't leave the house. It was the Taliban rule, as we all know it, that women were forbidden from leaving, going out, and not at all not going out without anybody accompanying them, a male member. They were not allowed to go to school. So she became depressed, and I decided at one point that I hadn't heard from her, and I felt that I needed to go and find her. So that was the whole purpose of trying to go back to Afghanistan, because it was a crazy decision, but my parents did back me up. And by that time, I was already...
They did back you up.
They did, yes. And by that time, I was already a university student. I'd moved to Ottawa to study journalism at Carleton, and I was still hoping that, well, one day things will improve in Afghanistan, and I would, but of course getting her notes about how life was getting worse than what we had even experienced. And I said to my parents that I feel I want to go, and they backed it up. They said, that's a right decision, but you have to be very careful.
They weren't afraid for you?
I think they were, but at the same time, if you survive certain things, I think your sense of acceptance and resilience is changed. It's different, It's if I'd grown up in North America in a very sheltered life, and all of a sudden wanted to go to Afghanistan, I can understand the agony and fear of the families that almost will freak out and go, my God. But my parents have been extremely good. I don't think I could do what I do if it wasn't for the support I'd received from my family. And so in that stage, and I really don't know what really compelled them, but it was just maybe compassion as well, that if they felt the life of a young woman who was like a sister to me is in danger, then if there's something I can do, it's a sense of responsibility. Yeah. So that's why I went back. Yeah.
So you went back, but you didn't find her.
No, I tried for several routes. I went to Iran. I tried to go to Pakistan. I went inside Afghanistan for a brief sort of a trip in to the country, and the people who were taking me in, they got terrified and they left. So we returned. We went back, and the story of that journey, which was unsuccessful in terms of what I had hoped to achieve, became the movie Kandahar in 2 years from the date that I tried to go. So I tried to go in 1998, and then I'd met a number of people, including filmmakers in Iran at that time, and then 2 years later, that story we shot it into a dramatic feature film. That was called Kandahar.
Which did very well.
Yes, it did very well, yeah. Unexpectedly, actually, yeah. But I do say that I think it had a lot to do with the timing of the political events around the world, which was, we released the film at the Cannes Film Festival in May of 2001. And in September, I think the interest in the movie was manifold, and the change was that when I was in Edinburgh and Cannes and a number of other festivals before September, and the interest was in the film itself as a craft, as a film, as a story, the acting, the images, all of that. But after September 11, the message shifted, and it became about Afghanistan. It became about the politics of the place. It became about the atrocities, and so it was no longer just being discussed as a film, as a piece of art. It became a vehicle for talking about more political and serious questions and matters. Yeah.
Now we're going to talk more about your life as a filmmaker and more specifically your latest film, Active Dishonor. But you really began your career as a journalist, and also you've written a book. Perhaps you can tell me about your book.
Sure, yeah. When we were living in Moncton, I made a very specific decision that I wanted to go and study journalism. And part of that, it wasn't necessarily because I thought having a life as a journalist would be glamorous. For me, it was a political thing. Coming out of a country like Afghanistan, where you survived the war, and you see what is considered the misuse of power, I felt that I wanted to go study journalism because idealistically, what I believed in that time, and one of my sort of iconic influences at the time was Oriana Fallaci, this Italian journalist, who was quite incredible in the career that she had. And one of the things she had said was journalism was about recording history in the moment of its happening. But combining that with the idea that it was also to expose centers of power. It was to show the influential people and how they can actually destroy your life. Like, we felt our lives were destroyed. I mean, we had to reconstruct it, unfortunately for us, coming to Canada and being able to do it. But millions of other people whose lives have been wrecked by political decisions around the world that are made by a few, and the abuse of that power. So it was quite a political thing for me. And, you know, I was 18 going to 19, and I said, I'm going to go study journalism. Yeah. And I remember my English wasn't as, you know, fluent at the time because I was just learning it. And a lot of people were saying, shouldn't you go study science or an easier subject matter, which has little to do with the language itself? And I'd say, no, but I want to study journalism. I don't care about the language. I want the message to get across that I want to expose centers of power, and I wanted to record, like, it would be a record of history as it's happening, and I'm a witness to that. So I came to Carleton, studied journalism. And the third year, I began to realize that news coverage was too short for what I had to say, for what I had to offer. And I began also to realize that I enjoyed writing. I've always, even as a kid, I used to just write, but I used to write in Farsi, in Persian. But once I learned English, it was quite difficult to actually put the first sentences together. As an adult, I was 18. I was 18 when I started to learn English. So I was struggling with the idea that I wanted to write, and I wanted to write more. The book, I think, that I ended up writing was...
And what's the title of it?
It's called A Bed of Red Flowers, In Search of My Afghanistan, and it's published by Random House in Canada. I'm very pleased that I've got... now it's been published in Arabic, it's published in Dutch. The Indonesian version of it in Basi is going to come out in the next few months, I think.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, thanks. So it's been quite, good in that sense, that it's actually getting around and it's still being picked up and read. But the book came quite later. I always say that it was inside me. The book was inside me for many years, because it is the stories of, my childhood growing up in a country and living under occupation and escaping it, and then going back to it, and then returning fully again after 13 years in 2002 for the first time. When I made an attempt to go in, I didn't go back to Kabul where I grew up. I just went into Herat. But when I managed the first time to go back to the city where I grew up was in 2002. So the book became a record of that. But my own sort of favorite part of it is the very last chapter. I always say I don't like my book. It's either because maybe it's too painful, or it's, it's that part of history, it's personal and political, that I wanted to share with others. But the last chapter, I decided to go to Russia and interview Soviet officers, intelligence officers, as well as soldiers, pilots, and mothers, and families of those who had gone to Afghanistan. I've interviewed people who had gone and dropped bombs in villages, and to find out what their life is like right now. And then I interviewed soldiers who had actually spent a year or a year and a half or 2 years rotation in Afghanistan. And I interviewed mothers whose sons have been killed in Afghanistan. And I felt that the book, for me, I wasn't going to sit down and write a book because I want to write a book. It was a kind of a therapeutic journey that I had to take at a certain juncture in my life, which was to deal with all that baggages of the past that I had carried with me all the way to Canada.
And we're going to have to actually, we're going to take a break. But before we do, I've got my regular Good to Know Minute. We'll talk more about your book after the break. But Nelofer, I know you've got a great tip for our audience.
Yes. Do you want me to say it now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, my tip for a successful living is that you have to be true to yourself. And what does that mean? Is that you have to be honest with yourself. If you're not honest with yourself, I don't think you will ever succeed in achieving anything.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to Extraordinary Women on thatchannel.com. I'm Shannon Skinner. We're speaking with Nelofer Pazira. Now, we were talking a bit about your book before the break. Let's talk a little bit about your latest film, Active Dishonor. Now, in your own words, what is the film about?
Oh gosh, it's hard to describe a film. I think for me it's about many things. I call it it's a love story. It is a dramatic film, of course. It's not a documentary. I make documentaries and I also make drama. And the film is, it also is about, it sort of underpins the very grim subject of honor killing. This is why it's called an act of dishonor or act of dishonor. And it also has to do with the plight of refugees returning home after the war. To me, it's a collection of human stories that have come together and been layered so we can get a more, I wouldn't say necessarily absolutely accurate, because of course everything's a perspective, but a little bit deeper look at the problems of Afghan society. And because so much in the West we're focused just about the war itself, this is taking a step sort of further away from that and looking into the deeper problems in the society.
So more of a psychological look.
I wouldn't call it psychological. It is a dramatic sort of story about, the two young people were in love and how the customs in that society and the codes of behavior dictates the lives of women and men, and how it affects and brings tragic consequences for this young couple, that they are to be married and they are thinking of having a life, but how that life's been broken off or affected by these codes of honor and by various aspects of a tradition that needs to be questioned and needs to be reviewed, in my view. So this is a kind of I consider the film as a form to open a debate and discussion on these topics. It doesn't try to answer too many questions. It's to allow for some questions to be asked.
I, of course, saw the film when it was in the theaters here in Toronto, and lovely film. The cinematography was just absolutely stunning. Difficult, of course, it's difficult to watch, difficult subject matter, but very eye-opening and thought-provoking. So thank you actually for making this film.
Thank you.
But what actually inspired you to make a film on this topic to begin with?
Well, I mean, I don't sit down. I'm not an issue-oriented person. I do things because I feel something, and whatever happens, I trust my instinct about things, and my instinct, I don't look for forms. I move from many things, like between so many things. Okay, I write, I love writing, I do journalism, I still work as a journalist. Most of my work's been with CBC, radio or TV. I do print as well from time to time. And I also make films, and I don't sit down and kind of go, oh, this subject, I will do this and this is the form. I kind of just follow. If I run into a story that's a human story, and I don't understand the marketing aspect of it, it's the human story that touches me. And if it touches me, I feel that I have the responsibility to share it. And whatever form it will come out as is something that will have to happen in its own. So I run into a story of a young woman whose life was affected by traditional practices. And I wanted to do that. I wasn't sure whether it's going to be a documentary, it's going to be a drama, it's going to be something I would write about it. I started off by, of course, writing. Everything, in my view, the base of anything that would worth other people's time, in my view, is good writing. So I started with writing, and then I started to elaborate on the scenes, and then it took a form that it could be a good dramatic feature. So went out, got producers, start working on it, and that I can consider it was a real life story that became the inspiration for it.
What was it like to shoot this film in Afghanistan? I mean, much of it was shot there.
When we talk of Afghanistan, we have this notion that it's either a very exotic country or it's awfully dangerous. It's like a cowboy movie for all of us, and a lot of us assume in the West, when I say all of us in the West, is we look at various images of the country, and although our knowledge of the country has increased far more than what at the time when I was living in Moncton, New Brunswick, where some people thought that Afghanistan was in Africa at the time. So despite all of that knowledge, we still had this image of the country, and it wasn't. I mean, okay, it's difficult to work in a place like that, partially because of lack of resources. We had to bring a lot of things from Canada overseas. The cost of that, the logistical arrangement of it. But the country itself has a landscape that offers for beautiful movie sets. I shot on location. We just rebuilt a couple of like broken or half ruined homes for the set, but the rest of the place was just there. We never had to spend time in setting up, like when you hear in the way usually Hollywood does is that they have to build entire sets. We never had to do that, and I think working in Afghanistan does offer that facility that you could just be anywhere and you can film and it still look like a beautiful set. Working with non-professional actors was challenging. I had a mix of 3 different category of cast. I had 2 Canadians were professional. I had 1 Afghan was fully professional. Then I had a semi-professional, and then I had sort of totally non-professional actors that were telling their real-life stories. So working with them was challenging, but it was enjoyable at the same time. If you're worried about the dangers of it, well, I think it's dangerous to work in the streets of Toronto too these days, isn't it?
Well, it sure is. Now, was there ever a time that you were actually afraid for your life when you were shooting?
No. I never make a big deal out of that. I think the fear of being in a place like that when there is insecurity and uncertainty, and unfortunately a lot of times it's the mafia gangs that are operating more than any other groups, is I think it's the people who live there all the time. People like myself. I always recognize the fact that I'll go there, I work there, but then I have another safe home somewhere else outside that place that I can run to when it comes to difficult times. But millions of people were trapped in that life. They're there. They have to deal with poverty. They have to deal with hardship. They have to deal with insecurity. They still have hopes and they're still resilient and they continue to do it. So I think it would be completely ridiculous in my part to think that my life's more precious than theirs. And I would be afraid for it. So I'm never afraid of anything, and there was no dangers to me. I think the people I work with, they're very respectable, and there are a lot of people who take the courage to step in front of the camera, living in that environment, including my actresses, my cast, a lot of the women who came out to be in that film. They deal with that problem every day. It's not an open society where you're really welcomed and celebrated as a woman being in front of a camera or being on TV. But they do it, and so I give the credit to them.
Now, it must be challenging being a female director probably anywhere, let alone making a film in Afghanistan.
Oh yeah, being a female director, I think it's an interesting subject matter to be discussed, even as a subject, because there are not a lot of women film directors in the world as an overall. It takes a lot from you. It's a demanding job. You have to love it. I do. I love it. Like tomorrow I'll go and shoot another film.
What do you love about it?
I think the bottom line, maybe it's about being in charge. It's being in control. I learned very long time ago when I was a student that a little Chinese saying, which I value enormously, that said, don't try to control, be in control. And for me, being on a film set or being on a film shoot, working with a team, is not about trying to control anybody. It's about being in control. And that's what I love about it. And the fact that I get to be in the strangest of places that you'll never imagine being. I couldn't dream about it. And then I arrive in a place and I go, wow, that will make for a beautiful set. And you get to meet all kinds of people and you get to work. And there is change. Some people are about routine. I like routine when I'm in Canada, but I get bored of it. So when I'm going and working on a subject or shooting or following a storyline, it is unpredictable. It is different. Each time the setting changes, it's not the same. Every time the challenges are different, and I like that. So I think that those are the things I know specifically that I enjoy about it.
Now, you also, not that your life isn't busy enough, you've also started a charity. The Diana Afghan Women's Fund.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, the charity came about in 2003. I started it in the memory of my late friend. So the friend that we started to talk about in the beginning of your program, who became the story of that journey, I tried to go and find her, became the movie Kandahar. And since I've been making many other projects somewhat relating to that, and that brought me into the world of film, in fact. I was kind of parachuted into the world of film through that film, that movie. I went eventually and found the family and discovered that that she had committed suicide. And she was depressed under the Taliban. She couldn't take it anymore. She wasn't the only one. There were a large number of women in Afghanistan that became suicidal, and they took their lives. Some of them ablaze themselves. They set fires on themselves. Some of them just took pills, and some of them just disappeared. So it is because of the fact that how they were forced to live the kind of life they did not want to live. It's hard for us in the West to even imagine that, but people went through that. And so I set in her memory, I set the charity to help other women in Afghanistan, and it's a very small charity. It's focused on women's education, mostly literacy, because literacy, unfortunately, is a big, like illiteracy in Afghanistan is really high. It's still at sort of about 80%. And to help women learn how to read and write, and then also skills training, so they could be economically independent, individuals within their own communities. And it is a very small charity in a sense that we don't have classes all across the country. We have classes in Bamyan province. I started in Kandahar and then moved to Bamyan, where the need was greater and the interest was greater as well. And it's been very successful. It doesn't cost a lot. It's, we have no administration fees. We have no offices. There is a board of 5 people that are all volunteers. We send every penny that people donate. We don't go out fundraise. We don't get funding from anybody. It's just donations. People who watch my films or read my book or read articles, or they watch me being interviewed, they send donations through the website or they mail it.
And what is the URL?
It's www.Diana Afghan Women's Fund, which is awf.ca. So www.dawf.ca, and this is where people can find out more about the charity and more about you as well. Exactly, and they can also, if they want to make donations to the charity, they also have all the information about the work of the charity and the women who are actually in these classes and what we do. Yeah.
Well, I would encourage, of course, anyone to check it out. Sounds like it's a good cause to me. Now, one last question before our time is up. You have a hobby. In all this crazy filmmaking, writing career that takes you, I know, all over the world, you do have a hobby.
Yeah, I do have a crazy lifestyle, which I love it. I think I wouldn't want to change it. I travel a lot. I'm hardly in one place more than 10 to 15 days at a time. Don't ask me why, it just happens like that. But I do. Everybody needs a sanctuary. And whenever people say to me, are you going to go on a holiday? Where are you going to travel? I say, travel? Are you kidding me? I want to hide in my garden. And so I have a garden. I have a small garden. It's about 4 years now that I'm working on it. It's a kind of what I call it a Persian garden. So I brought hand-painted tiles from Iran, which are real beautiful Persian turquoise colors. Build a water course where these tiles sit, because most Persian gardens have 2 elements to it. They have water and they have fruit trees. So my little tiny box of a garden in suburban Toronto is a semblance or a glimpse of what I consider this Persian garden infusion, which has lots of fruit trees with no fruits, of course. This is Canada, let's not get carried away. The season won't allow for it, but so it's a combination of lots of trees and a water course that lots of birds show up and they enjoy swimming and drinking, and I can hide there for whatever number of days and hours, and I love it. That is what keeps me sane, I guess, sometimes, because we do need something that we can hold on to that has that idea of a routine to it, and so that's where my routine comes in.
In your sanctuary, in your garden in Toronto.
Yeah.
Well, Nelofer, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story, your inspiring story, and I wish you all the best with all your artistic endeavors.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be on your show.